You're live.
Thank you. Good morning. It is May 7th, and we are here with the Joint Legislative Management Committee. We have just one order of business to deal with, which is the ongoing discussion as to how we are going to get ourselves back into the State House in some form to do our work. And as we discussed in the last meeting, it's a complicated endeavor. It involves a number of committees and a lot of input from stakeholders. This morning, we're going to try to the best of our ability to identify important decision points and figure out what is the working timeline right now for those decision points. We put our attorneys to work to investigate those decision points and where the jurisdictional issues lie in terms of which committee needs to weigh in on which aspects of this. So if I could turn it, I believe, over to Jennifer Carby from Ledge Council. Here she is. Good morning, Jen. If you
Good morning.
Could, give the committee an overview of the discussion that you had, and then as best as you can, take us through some decision points and where you think the jurisdiction for those decisions lies.
Sure. Jennifer Carby, Legislative Council. And I did meet, I've met with Mike O'Grady, and I met with the House Clerk and Senate Secretary to talk through some of this. We've also been working with Catherine Benham and Becky Wasserman. I think most of them are on this call. So if they, if you are willing and they want to join in, I would welcome them to be part of what I go over with you as well.
Great.
So we did look at some of the issues, particularly focusing on some of the decision points that were in the Freeman, French, and Freeman report. I think on pages 21 and 21, 22, 23, they kind of highlight some of the questions about whether there's a full or partial return. Will there be capacity limits? Are you going to make any changes to scheduling or operational capacities, things like that? So those were really the kinds of questions that we focused on. And it seems like the jurisdiction of this committee is particularly involving issues that relate to staff. So the charge of the Joint Legislative Management Committee is to provide general oversight and management across the offices of the General Assembly and coordinating the operations of the Office of Legislative Operations and its delivery of shared administrative services. So the focus, I think, is really on things that involve staff. So whether staff are in the building or elsewhere, how staff are involved, whether we need additional staff to carry out some additional missions. For example, if you expand the use of IT in the building, you will likely need additional IT staff, and that would be something that would be fall within the jurisdiction of this committee. As far as the larger questions about how the legislature comes back in person, whether the legislature comes back in person, what kind of access there is to the building, that seems to fall more in the area of joint rules or for chamber specific decisions within the House and Senate rules committees rather than this committee. Although, of course, you could, through legislation, you could vest that power in or that decision-making authority in whatever group you thought was most appropriate. So based on the current structure of our statutes and rules, that's kind of where things seem to lie. You may want to be explicit in legislation, whether in a bill or in a joint resolution, about how you see those decisions being made, by whom, using what standards if the legislature is not in session, and things like that. But just based on what exists now, that's where we saw the authority kind of falling out.
So I have a question, Jen, if we could go back to the Jlmc charge, when we say that this committee here is really charged with issues involving staff, from where you sit, does that include deciding where staff offices will be as we envision moving forward beyond the current footprint of the Capitol complex?
Yes, I certainly think there is a role for this committee in that. I think there will be roles for other both legislative bodies, some of the capital construction issues, if there are those kinds of issues, they will be informing those kinds of decisions. There's also, roles for BGS in some of that going forward. I think there was talk last week about the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House. Their authority really does seem to be advisory, as their name suggests. So the statutes that lay out their role suggest that they would be consulted and that they would provide input, but that they do not have their own decision-making capacity under the way the statutes are currently written.
Catherine, did you want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing. In the capital bill last year, there was actually specific language that requires BGS shall require approval from the Joint Legislative Management Committee for any proposals to relocate space used by the legislative branch. And Jlmc has to consult with the two chairs of the institutions committees.
Okay.
Thanks, Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
And Catherine, may I just, and that was not case specific, that was ongoing? That was?
Yes, and it's section 20 of last year's bill. I can send it to all of you if you would like.
That would be great. Representative Ansel?
I was just going to ask if you could send it. I don't think I've understood what it did. So.
Fair enough.
Well, I think, let me just say briefly, the Commissioner of BGS has the authority to put people in spaces in state buildings. And in the discussion last year, you all wanted to have some authority where you could have your own independence from that process. So it starts off with notwithstanding. I will send that to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, clarifications we need from Jen? Okay, so Jen, when you met with Michael Grady and did you say Secretary Bloomer and Betsy Ann as well? Did you go through the questions in the report regarding when certain decisions needed to be made and the timeline for this process?
We did not look at the timing for those specific decisions. I think we were focusing more on the jurisdictional issues about who would be authorized to make those decisions under the current statutory and rule framework.
Okay, I think what I'd like to do now, and I should have said this at the top of the meeting, is that Representative Emmons does not sit on the Joint Legislative Management Committee. She is in attendance because she chairs the Institutions Committee on the House side, and obviously there are a lot of issues involved with that committee, which is why she is, I think we're going to see a lot of her. So thank you, Representative Emmons, for joining us. My understanding is that Senator Benning started to take some testimony this week regarding excuse me, space issues. And I'm wondering, Joe, if you would like to just give us an update on how you see your process within your committee unfolding.
Well, first, let me say that Alice has the capital bill right now, and we've recognized we have about 8 business days left. We see the capital bill as the vehicle that any of these conversations managing to gel and give us some direction has to be contained in the capital bill. So we've been working fairly hard and together to try to keep this process going. One of the things the Freeman report did not really take into account is what I was calling operational dynamics, and I've learned now is actually architectural programming. The space needs that were discussed in that document were driven through a narrative of the existence of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we all have to be thinking about is that COVID-19 may not be the driving factor when we finally make decisions on how to get back into the building. If COVID-19 is still there, Zoom is always an option. but we have been paralyzed in trying to get things accomplished because the entire narrative has been literally overtaken by the COVID-19 question. So changing the narrative is part of the process of my committee trying to take testimony from people who were normally in the building, were there prior to COVID-19, now have experienced COVID-19, and what is it that they would want to say as stakeholders about coming back into the building. And please keep in mind that the building is the public's property, and it is constitutionally required that we treat it as such. So I've been taking testimony from stakeholders. There have been no commitments made to anyone, and I have stressed with every one of those folks that the Freeman report is nothing more than a talking point. There is no decision-making process that has kicked in here yet, that we are simply gathering information. The information gathered thus far has been quite enlightening for those of us who chair institutions committees, because we've never gone through the process before of trying to figure out how to bring the operational dynamics or architectural programming into the mix. Usually we say, how much space do you need? And we go find it. Now we have to take care of things like, do we recognize and acknowledge that every legislative council member needs to have their own office where they can meet privately with their clients, specifically us? Is Mike Ferrant, for instance, okay in a room by himself, or is there a reason to keep him, Charlene, Maria, and Peggy in a specific location together that would be improving the operational dynamics moving forward? So just wrestling with all those basic questions. We are desperate to figure out how to trigger advances of any kind, and we haven't been able to get to that point yet. Today we have our last group of people coming in that I consider stakeholders, and that is lobbyists. Our first two sessions consisted of the staff in the building. It was very enlightening and very helpful. Yesterday was the media, very enlightening and somewhat comical, but also some pretty clear statements about what the media intended to do in the event that we somehow shut them out of the building. And that's one of those things you have to think about. This Zoom process for the media has not been good at all, and they are very desirous of having full transparency. So one of the things we have to think about moving forward is what potential litigation could we embroil ourselves in? And that's the purpose of these conversations, is just to gather information and have some knowledge about what potential minefields are out there. But I'll close by saying we have made no commitments. We are making no commitments. The first thing that has to happen is, I think I'm speaking for Alice as well as myself, is we have to have an understanding of what committee or committees are making the decisions moving forward, so we know who to report this information to. And I appreciate the fact that Jen Carby has outlined what I think are the committee jurisdictions. I'd like to be able, for my own personal health, I'd love to be able to see some of those functions consolidated into one unit so that we don't have too many cooks in the kitchen. That's pretty much all I can say. I'm happy to answer questions.
So, Senator, I think a question that I have, following up on that last point that you made, do you and Representative Emmons have recommendations for how to consolidate some of this decision-making?
I think the capital bill is the vehicle for which we can all say, let's take this committee as an example, which in my eyes would be the most preferable to be making the decision. When are we coming back? Are we going to be changing the narrative to one of post-COVID? And I think that has to come from somewhere. That decision-making has to come from someplace. And I see this committee as being the most ideal, quite frankly. If you are asking me personally what I would love to see happen, we have to get language into the capital bill that authorizes this committee to meet through the summer, to take whatever testimony is necessary and come up with a report very soon, frankly. We cannot wait until fall in order to give BGS marching orders on how to start making changes. And I should have said earlier, BGS is an integral part of this conversation. One of the things I think Alice and I were shocked about yesterday was we've all had this question about the HVAC system and the air quality in the building and what's going on in each committee room. But nobody has ever asked BGS to actually go in and do an HVAC study to talk about the air quality and how many people would be ideal in each committee room. We asked them to do that yesterday. I think that's within our power to be able to say, gee, guys, can you do that? And it's just a couple of days process. But the fact that nobody had ever done it before is the example of what is going on right now with this committee. We have to have someplace that's at the top of the pyramid and we can move from there.
So I'm going to turn to, before I go to comments and questions, Representative Emmons, anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I agree with what Senator Benning has said, but I would also want to clarify if we're still on the path of having the State House Advisory Committee being involved, because the thinking is that that's the committee that would really do a deeper dive in terms of what Senator Benning's Committee on Institutions is doing right now, is really listening to all the stakeholders and really focusing in on, well, what if we did this move here? What if we did this move here? And what are the implications? And then to also work, and this is a conversation that Senator Benning and I had last evening with BGS, with the commissioner of BGS. They have a planning architect on staff that advisory committee could work with. So there's some integration there. And then the advisory committee, we were thinking, could give recommendations. Could it be to the management committee here or joint rules? And we're saying that we're thinking those recommendations need to be given by August 15th. So, you know, we're really cognizant that Kevin Moore needs to know what we're doing for IT so he can order supplies. And we need to know if there's any furniture that needs to be purchased, or I don't want to get into deep renovations, but there may be needing up in some of the rooms. So we need to get this going. So that's where we are. And I'm waiting to put all of this language in the Capitol bill on our side.
Okay. I see a number of people that like to jump in here. I see the speaker and then Representative Ansel and then Senator Kitchell.
Thank you. So I think we have two things here that we're working on. We have our long-term planning process for how we come back in January, but I think we also need to recognize that we need to address how we come back in the short term with joint committees, and possibly if we need to come back for a special session in October. Hopefully we won't need to, but we've been talking about the importance of having that in our adjournment resolution, and in case there are bills that come out of Washington that we need to act on quickly or respond to. So I'm wondering, you know, with joint rules is about how we come back for joint hearings and things of that nature. And I'm wondering, and I'm just putting this out here as I listen to, you know, Senator Benning and Representative Emmons and talking about the long-term work. And if we try to have joint rules tackle the short term while this group tackles the long term, obviously we have to work super closely together, but I just want to recognize that we have two challenges and two processes to work out here.
Thank you.
Beck, if I could just
I'm going to have you wait. I'm going to have you wait, Joe. if that's okay. I'm going to have you wait. Representative Ansel?
So my question has to do with the State House Advisory Committee and its role. I'd like to understand better sort of who's on it and what its function has been and what its charge has been. As an advisory committee, I want to understand about it. I think it has an important role. I want to be careful that we don't expand that role in some way that makes it more difficult to make the decisions that clearly we need to make fairly quickly. So I'm a little cautious about that part of the conversation and just really need to have a better understanding of it. I really appreciate what Senator Benning had said about the need for somebody to make the decision. One of the beauties of the building and the work we do is how decentralized it is. And there are so many times that I love it for that. But it's not a great structure for the situation that we're in right now. And so we're going to have to do something to deal with it. And, I'm interested in the different ideas, but those are a couple of comments.
So if, Jen, if you could, while we're sitting here, just send a link to the members of the committee regarding the part in statute that deals with that advisory committee. That would be great.
I can send you the information. There isn't a link on our website that I could find to who is on the actual members appointed. So I can send you the charge that sets out who's supposed to be appointed or who's on it, but not the individual member names.
Great. I'm going to go to. Great. So I'm going to go to Senator Kitchell and then back to Joe.
Okay.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes, my question was a bit similar to Janet's, but it also is what I said at the last meeting, and then Joe's referencing it again. As I said, one throat to choke. We've got to be clear where ultimately the decision has to be made, and decisions have to be made in a very quick time frame. And so there is that relationship in the State House Advisory, but what we're talking about is beyond the State House. We're talking about other properties within that Capitol complex. So while they may have a role, it's not. It's with some limitation. So I think that's important. The other issue that Joe raised is around what legal obligations are there. He was, the risk of litigation. From my perspective, it would be helpful to have a legal examination of what actually we think is that what we're legally obligated to do. And obviously, there's been a lot of transparency. It's been remotely. And so I think we need to have a better understanding of what legally we're obligated to provide. And there may be some other areas that need to have that kind of examination as committees have taken testimony, but I haven't got a clue whether if you're able to observe remotely, is that fulfilling the legal obligation? Does it always have to be in person?
Right.
What are the options there? So, and the other is some of this, we need technical, we've got the Freeman, French and Freeman, but the committees are saying, well, BGS hasn't even done anything on HVAC. And so it seems like we've got to really start getting in a very organized way. What are the very fundamental, and committees don't have that expertise. BGS, I guess, probably does, but what are those improvements or modifications that are necessary for if we're coming back in January? And I don't know whether we rely on BGS to do that or not. So those are my thoughts about, let's find out what we're legally obligated to do as a minimum, and then recognize that maybe there's State House Advisory, but it comes with limitations within this larger discussion. And as I said before, we can have everybody involved, but nobody accountable. And to me, that's going to be our challenge.
I think we many of us share that concern. Senator Benning?
Just wanted to go back to the speaker's point about the short term. The rules as they currently exist enable Zoom while the governor's executive order is in place, or the first week in January, whichever comes later. So technically the decisions.
Senator
about-
Benning, Senator
Yes.
Benning, that's actually not true. And so I will have the speaker speak to that.
Okay.
We have not come to agreement in joint rules about that.
Oh.
The House has not concurred with our position. So
Ah,
therein
thank
lies
you.
the rub.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes.
That
Yes.
makes a big difference.
Yes.
Yes,
Speaker,
so
why don't you explain? Because I'm sure Senator Benning is not the only one that isn't aware of that.
mhm. So the House Rules Committee has been meeting and conferring with members about what to get feedback about how people are feeling about coming back in the building for joint committees and House committees and a possible session in October. And the feedback I'm getting from House members is that they want to come back. And so we sent JRS 24 to House Rules Committee for further discussion. And we are currently debating what our House resolution looks like moving forward. There is agreement that we extend the session to May 22nd and have the veto session, if needed, done remotely. But past that, we are still trying to find consensus on what that looks like. And so I think what makes sense is for us, for me to call a joint rules committee next week, once we have more information from the House to talk about options moving forward.
I thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons a committee like this is critically important, because if we're all operating in separate silos, it's problematic, but I appreciate hearing that.
And so to follow up on so many of these excellent points that people have made so far, one thing that is giving me a little bit of anxiety is figuring out how much responsibility we don't want joint rules to lose. We have representatives from from both the minority and the majority on joint rules. The minority leaders are not part of this committee. I understand we do have members of the minority party in both chambers, but I think there's something about joint rules that adds a particular level of gravitas to decision making. So for me, I'm very conscious of that and making sure that we are really clear about what makes sense in terms of the decision-making body. It may be this committee when we talk through all of the ins and outs. I just don't want to make a quick decision about that. I want to make sure that we are thinking about the voices that are represented on this committee, and are they truly representing both chambers adequately? That is something that's been on my mind.
Could I just ask if it would be entertained that the members of joint rules, it's a finite group, some of them are on this committee. Why not put the rest of them on this committee, and then you have everybody consolidated in one place?
It's an interesting idea. Yeah, no, it's an interesting idea. I'm making a note of that. Okay. I know this brings up so many issues. I know there are a few people on the call that haven't said anything yet. Want to make sure I'm leaving space for them. Was that a hand, Madam Speaker? Okay, yes, Representative Kowinski.
The one other concern I have is if we're talking about possibly consolidating joint rules and JLMC, we have a major, timing concern in that you have the language in the capital bill that's moving, but we also have to make a decision about that adjournment resolution. And so I'm curious, I don't know if the House clerk or the Senate secretary have feedback on this, but I think we need to be really mindful of timing. And if this is a decision that we want to make in consolidating these two committees, we have to make sure that we have a plan on how we decide on a plan for our adjournment resolution, which falls to the Joint Rules Committee.
I
Just
see
to
Betsy
throw
Ann.
one more
Good
thing out.
morning.
Good morning.
House Clerk Betsy Ann Rask.
Hello,
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, it would take a statutory change, correct, to make any changes to the membership of this JLMC, correct, to add members to it. That's one consideration. Joint Rules has always, I think, been the point of the point entity for the adjournment resolution. So perhaps they could still maintain that authority in consultation with JLMC, and there would, if there is a statutory change in the meantime, there would be that overlap among the members. Regardless, you need to have a joint resolution in some manner for your adjournment resolution, and in that adjournment resolution, you'll need to make the decisions on any reconvening for fall, if necessary. Language would need to be in there for that. And then related to that, the manner of coming back for any fall session and the reconvening in 22. I see Secretary Bloomer is also here if he wants to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll try. I'm having a little trouble with my connection. I'm in a vehicle, so I apologize for that. I would discourage consolidation for this purpose, because once you change the statute, then you have to change it back if you decide to re-separate them. I think that there's an ability to work in concert. There may be some joint meetings, but I don't think you want to be consolidating the two committees.
Representative Ansel.
Thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate, I think the fact that there's some overlap of membership is really helpful, and there's overlap of membership with the Institutions Committee. I think having Representative Emmons participate in this period of time makes a whole lot of sense, even if it's informal. I have a little concern about consolidating, because I think it may change the function of Joint Rules and this committee in ways that we haven't really thought through a whole lot. And I just, I'm not sure it's necessary given the, I do think that going back to what the speaker said about the short-term decisions and how best to work our way through those, that it does seem to me that Joint Rules.
John Bloomer, could you mute? Thank you.
Sorry. It does seem to me that Joint Rules is probably better positioned to make those short-term decisions, understanding and you know, the impacts on staff do matter, and that so this committee does need to you know, stay involved and stay active in how those decisions get made. But anyway, just some thoughts. I think we probably we need to make sure that we can make those short-term decisions, and I don't think we can do structural changes in order to do that.
So just to clarify for the committee, I know everyone's time is so precious at this time of year. So I just want to make sure we have clarity on what those short-term decisions are that we need to make. One is any language that needs to go into the capital bill regarding the process. That's top of mind. What are the other short-term decisions that need to be made? I will entertain comments. Senator Benning?
One of the short-term decisions that has to be made is dealing with 133 State Street, 2 and 4 Aiken, and the Baldwin situation. I know there are negotiations going on outside of this committee process, but just to plant this seed with whoever's doing the negotiating, in order for BGS to get off the ground and follow through on things that are going to be happening in the building, they themselves have to know where they are going to be. So coming to some concrete decisions to get that negotiation resolved is really critical at this point, and I can't stress that enough.
speaker something to add to that or another?
Just if there's anything that IT needs to get approved. It's the only other thing I have on my list.
And then obviously, based on the conversation here, the short-term decision that will allow us to do the long-term decision-making is just being clear on who's making what decisions and just like tightening that up. Representative Ansel?
I've also been thinking about not just sessions of the House and Senate, but also we've got at least 2 task forces and probably more, but 2 that are going to do some pretty intensive work.
Yes.
They're joint task forces or committees, so we have to be in
Yes.
agreement about how they meet. And
Yes.
so I'd add that to the short-term list.
Great. I'm just looking to make sure I'm not leaving anyone out here. And so turning to, oh, yes, Senator Kitchell.
What I would find helpful if the institutions committees have obviously been taking testimony and there's been some, but if we could just have some kind of a bullet summary of the issues or what or the concerns or recommendations that, I mean, it seems like a lot of information has been gathered. There's been 3 sessions, one with the press, one with staff, one with advocates. It seems like it would be good if we had a summary of what emerged from that work, just for our consideration. As I said, the issue around litigation, access, those kinds of things, but there might be more. So I would find that beneficial if we just had not narrative, just bullets or something, right. But so that we all have the benefit of that, what emerged from that effort.
Senator Benning and Representative Emmons, does that seem possible?
Would you like that right now?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, I wanted it in writing.
Well, I've actually got quite a bit of notes on the subject, so I have to consolidate them first.
Senator, just to be clear, you may not take a picture of it and then send it to us, okay? Just to be clear, we'd like it typed out if possible. Okay. Anything to add to that, Joe, or follow-up questions you have for Jane about what she's looking for?
No, I think I'm pretty clear. I can get that together.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I think it's critical that Senator Benning and Representative Emmons, you keep us abreast as soon as you're clear on all the things that you need from us. I understand there's a fair amount of pressure that you're under right now with the Capitol bill. We want to help, smooth that process for you. And so I know that we're all maxed out and we're about to be fitting conference committees in the mix as well. But we are here to support the work that the institutions committees are doing right now. You're doing the first heavy lift on this. So please let us know how we can help you in the process.
Becca, with that thought in mind, It is very helpful for us to know right away what the status of the negotiations are on the property swaps.
I agree. And so, Madam Speaker, I don't know if you have any information that you can share at this time.
Let me check because it's been moving and changing, and so I don't want to give an update that is out already old. So let us catch up with you offline on the latest.
Okay.
Thank you.
And yes, Representative Emmons.
I would just like to follow up on Representative Ansel's question on the advisory committee, because I've been mulling this over overnight too, because the function of the committee is to look at furnishings and refurbishing within the building, renovations and expansion of the building and its interior. So that goes to what Senator Kitchell was saying. It is within the building. It's not incorporating 133 State Street or 2 Aiken or any of that. And the other piece is that it would send its recommendations to the Sergeant at Arms and Commissioner of BGS. So last evening when I was thinking about we were talking about the architectural planner coming on board and then making a recommendation to whom. I was thinking, I don't want to get in and change the statute itself for that committee. And I was going to reach out to our legislative council and see if there's a way that we could tailor this for this specific issue. Either do it through session law change or something of that magnitude, because we also talked about the membership. Right now it's 3 members from the House and 3 members from the Senate. And when you voted last Tuesday, it was agreed to increase that to 4 members from the House and 4 from the Senate. So instead of going in and changing statute, I'd like to have a conversation with legislative council to see if there's a way to tailor this for this specific issue. So that might help Senator Ansel, or it might not. I don't know.
I think that Senator Kitchell.
Representative Ansel, I'm sorry. I elevated you.
or demoted, depending on your lens.
We've both been in the building for a long time.
Senator Kitchell.
I really struggled with how you want to add or subtract, but I think we need to recognize that this is an advisory committee.
Yes.
And they can advise, and I can certainly see that they've done a lot to get back to the historical purity of the building and the furnishings and so forth. But at some point, I think we can recognize their advisory, but that is the limitation of their role. And so I think the earlier concern was not somehow expanding what that committee does, and that, as I'd said before, this is really a larger plan to address the space needs than simply the State House itself. So I just don't want us to make our this process even more difficult by having something that's advisory all of a sudden take on a greater influence or decision or whatever. So I just think we need to understand it's there, but I'm not sure that adding more people to it necessarily is more legislators is the right response, because we've got plenty of other legislators that are involved in this discussion, whether they're on the institutions committee or on this committee. That's not, you don't even need to respond. It's a comment.
So at this point, I don't think there are any decisions that we need to make at this time. We're looking to have Senator Benning and Representative Emmons think about what language might be needed within the Capitol bill. They'll be coming back to this committee, obviously, about that. We've got follow-up that needs to be done on 133 and conversations involving 133 State and Baldwin and the administration. The last bit here that I think is critical is Kevin Moore on this call?
I don't think he could make it this morning.
Okay, all right. Well, so another piece that we'll follow up the next time is around IT. If he is not here, it doesn't make any sense to take that up now. So I really want to thank Betsy Ann Rask and Secretary Bloomer, Jen Carby, and Michael Grady for spending time trying to help us sort through this. It is a busy time. We pulled you together at the last minute, and I really appreciate your time. So be watching your email. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of time together. And the other thing that I want to say is I think what can get lost in all of this is that despite the hardness of the pandemic and the emergency and all the pressure that we are under right now, this is actually a really exciting opportunity for us to make the People's House and the complex much more accessible to the public and to the press, and to work for all of us. We've all felt the space constraints for years. It's just that the pandemic has highlighted it. So as much as this is going to be really hard work, I'm actually really excited about the process and appreciate all of the wisdom that is in this committee as I look around. So with that, I would entertain yes, Representative Ansel.
So do we have a standing meeting next Tuesday, or when do we
Yes,
gather?
we have a standing meeting next Tuesday at 8. Thank you for that reminder. At this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.